I was 30 miles from home when my security camera showed an HOA inspector unlocking my front door with a brass key that should not have existed. My name is Ryan Collins, and I had never given anyone permission to enter my house. She did not sneak, panic, or even look guilty. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind her as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. At the time, I thought I was looking at one inspector who had crossed the line. I didn't realize that brass key was only the first clue. If you have ever wondered how far an HOA can really go, stay with me, because I thought I knew exactly what I was dealing with. I was wrong. To understand how an ordinary homeowner ended up watching a county sheriff investigate the very people who claimed they were protecting the neighborhood, we have to go back to the week I believed I had finally found a place that was completely my own. The week I closed on my house, I promised myself I would never treat it like just another address. After years of repairing heating and cooling systems inside other people's homes, I finally owned one that was completely mine. I changed every exterior lock before I unpacked the first moving box, installed a smart lock on the front door, mounted security cameras covering every entrance, and organized every closing document, warranty, permit, and receipt inside a labeled filing cabinet in my home office. I believed good records solved most problems before they became expensive ones. My new neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio looked exactly like the kind of place where nothing unusual ever happened. The lawns were trimmed, children rode bicycles after school, and neighbors waved while walking their dogs. 2 days after moving in, a welcome packet from the Homeowners Association arrived. It included community rules, contact information, and a short letter introducing the senior compliance inspector, Elaine Foster. The letter explained that exterior inspections helped maintain neighborhood standards and encouraged homeowners to schedule appointments whenever interior access was ever necessary. The wording sounded professional, reasonable, and respectful. 3 days later, I met Elaine while unloading tools from my work truck. She smiled, welcomed me to the neighborhood, complimented the condition of the property, and reminded me that any future fence replacement would require architectural approval. Our conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. She came across as experienced, organized, and genuinely proud of the community she helped manage. Nothing about the encounter made me uncomfortable. The first small problem appeared the following week when I received a violation notice claiming my trash containers had remained visible overnight. Before responding, I opened my camera recordings instead of relying on memory. The footage showed me rolling both containers back into the garage less than 20 minutes after collection. I politely emailed the management office with the exact timestamp attached. The violation quietly disappeared from my homeowner account the next morning without explanation. I assumed someone had simply entered the wrong address. A second notice arrived 4 days later, this time claiming construction materials had been stored in public view. Once again, I checked my cameras before replying. The lumber had been delivered at 8:15 that morning and carried into the garage before 9. Another courteous email. Another violation quietly withdrawn. I still believed I was dealing with ordinary administrative mistakes. Then, on Friday evening, I returned from a service call and noticed something so small most people would have walked right past it. One dining chair inside my living room had been turned slightly toward the front window instead of facing the table where I distinctly remembered leaving it. I stood silently in the doorway, looking from the chair to the smart lock history on my telephone. Every entry showed only my own code. No failed attempts. No unknown access. No remote unlock. As I stepped outside to clear my head, I saw Elaine walking across the street toward her vehicle. She smiled politely, wished me a pleasant weekend, and casually asked whether everything inside the house looked all right. I answered honestly that everything looked fine, even though I had not mentioned the chair to anyone. Elaine smiled, wished me a good evening, and drove away without another word. The conversation lasted only a few seconds, but one question stayed with me all weekend. Why had she asked about the inside of my house instead of the yard or driveway she was responsible for inspecting? I still refused to jump to conclusions. On Monday morning, I stopped by the furniture store where I had purchased the dining set because I wondered if I had simply remembered the chair incorrectly while unpacking. Halfway through the drive, I realized how unreasonable that sounded. I turned around, went home, and checked something I had ignored before. My security cameras recorded every exterior entrance, but none faced the living room. If someone had entered legally with a key, the cameras should still have captured them walking through the front door. That afternoon, I enabled cloud backups on every camera so no recording could be overwritten automatically. The following day, I received a polite telephone call from Elaine. She explained that she wanted to schedule a routine compliance visit for the following Thursday at 5:30 in the afternoon because she needed to verify several exterior items before closing my property file. I agreed without hesitation because I planned to be home. The conversation ended on friendly terms, and for a moment I felt embarrassed that I had even questioned her motives. Less than 2 hours later, while replacing a compressor at a customer's house nearly 30 miles away, my telephone vibrated with a live motion alert from my front door camera. I expected to see a package delivery. Instead, I watched Elaine walk onto my porch carrying the same clipboard from our earlier conversations. She looked around briefly, reached into her jacket pocket, removed an old brass key, unlocked my front door without knocking, and stepped inside as calmly as if she were arriving for an appointment that had already been approved. I froze with the live video still playing in my hand. She never forced the lock. She never hesitated. She acted like someone following a routine she had performed many times before. I immediately saved the recording to multiple locations instead of driving home in panic because I knew preserving the evidence mattered more than arriving after she had already left. 6 minutes later, she came back through the front door, locked it with the same brass key, made several notes on her clipboard, and drove away. My scheduled inspection was still 2 days in the future. When I finally reached home that evening, nothing appeared stolen, damaged, or disturbed. Then I opened my homeowner portal and found a brand new inspection report already marked as successfully completed, including observations that could only have been made by someone who had been inside my house before the appointment had supposedly taken place. I did not call the police that night because one video alone could not answer the question that mattered most. Why had Elaine acted like she had every right to unlock my front door? Instead of confronting her immediately, I compared the inspection report with the footage from my camera. The timestamps matched within minutes, but something else caught my attention. The report mentioned that the mechanical equipment inside my attached garage appeared properly maintained. That observation could not have been made from the driveway because the garage door had remained closed all afternoon. Whoever completed the report had physically entered the house and walked into the garage. Early the next morning, I drove to the property management office carrying a printed copy of the inspection report, but leaving the video safely backed up at home. A receptionist welcomed me with a smile and pulled up my homeowner file. When I politely asked why my inspection had been completed before the scheduled appointment, she frowned at the screen and apologized for what she called an unusual timeline. She excused herself to speak with a supervisor. Several minutes later, she returned and explained that the appointment listed in my file had already been marked as fulfilled, so the Thursday visit had been automatically canceled. Before I could ask another question, my telephone buzzed with an email confirming that my inspection appointment no longer existed because my property had successfully passed review. The explanation sounded efficient, but it answered none of the questions that actually mattered. On the drive home, I stopped at the county recorder's office to request another copy of my closing documents. I wanted to confirm something I had barely noticed when I bought the house. The paperwork clearly transferred exclusive possession of the property to me at closing, and every key identified in the sale had been delivered to the buyer. Nothing mentioned a homeowners association retaining continuing access after ownership changed. That discovery did not prove Elaine had acted unlawfully, but it removed the only simple explanation I had been willing to believe. I spent the evening reading the Homeowners Association governing documents from beginning to end instead of searching internet opinions. Exterior inspections were described in detail. Interior access required homeowner consent or another lawful basis. No section authorized inspectors to unlock occupied homes on their own initiative. The more carefully I read, the less confident I became that this was simply a misunderstanding. The following morning, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. Elaine stood on my porch wearing the same calm expression she always carried. She apologized for the canceled appointment and said there had been a scheduling mix-up inside the office. Then she smiled politely and added a sentence that immediately changed everything. "I am glad you found everything inside your home exactly the way I left it." I looked at Elaine without answering immediately because she had just admitted something she could not take back. She seemed to realize it a second later. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly before she smiled again and corrected herself. I mean, after the inspection was completed. The sentence sounded carefully repaired, but the damage had already been done. I simply thanked her for stopping by and watched her walk back to her vehicle. Instead of following her or confronting her with the video, I wrote down her exact words while they were still fresh in my memory, including the time she arrived and the time she left. I had spent enough years writing service reports to know that accurate notes made later conversations much harder to dispute. That afternoon, I made a decision that changed my strategy completely. I stopped trying to prove Elaine had entered my house. I already had evidence of that. Instead, I began asking whether she believed she had legal authority to do it. The answer would determine everything that followed. I requested copies of every homeowners association document that addressed inspections, emergency access, property entry, and management transitions. 2 days later, a digital packet arrived. Buried inside the older records was a community newsletter published several years before I purchased my home. One paragraph thanked residents for updating their locks after a change in management and stated that homeowners now maintained exclusive control over access to their properties. The announcement celebrated the change as an important privacy improvement. Yet nothing in the newer documents explained what had happened to any keys that might have existed before the transition. The omission bothered me more than any accusation could have. I then called the title company that handled my closing and asked a narrow question instead of describing the entire situation. Did the closing process leave any continuing access rights with the homeowners association? The closing officer checked the file and answered without hesitation. No such reservation appeared anywhere in the transaction. Ownership and possession transferred entirely to the buyer on the day of closing. That answer strengthened my confidence, but it also revealed a new problem. If the paperwork, the governing documents, and the newsletter all pointed toward homeowner control, why had Elaine behaved with complete confidence instead of secrecy? Late Friday afternoon, I received an email from the management company informing me that all future communication regarding my property would be handled through the association's legal counsel, because concerns had been raised about my repeated questions regarding inspection procedures. The message contained no explanation and no answers to the documents I had requested. Before I could decide whether to respond, my homeowner portal refreshed automatically. A restricted menu briefly appeared on the screen labeled Property Access Archive. It disappeared almost instantly, but not before I noticed a single line underneath it that read, Active Legacy Key Inventory. I captured a screenshot of the portal before the hidden menu vanished, even though it showed only a fraction of a second. The words Property Access Archive and Active Legacy Key Inventory were enough to convince me that I needed to preserve everything before asking another question. Instead of sending another email to the association, I hired an attorney whose practice focused on homeowner association disputes. During our first meeting, she did not begin by discussing lawsuits. She organized every document into chronological order, compared the inspection report with the camera timestamps, reviewed the closing records, and read the old community newsletter twice. When she finished, she smiled for the first time and said I had done something many people never think to do. I had collected evidence before making accusations. That gave us options. Acting on her advice, we sent a formal preservation letter to the association and its management company demanding that all inspection records, internal communications, access logs, key inventories, electronic records, and management transition documents connected to my property be retained. The letter did not accuse anyone of wrongdoing. It simply warned that destroying or altering records after receiving notice could create additional legal problems. 3 days later, an unexpected telephone call came from the regional manager of the management company. He introduced himself, apologized for the confusion surrounding my inspection, and invited me to review my homeowner file in person. Sitting across the conference table, he carefully examined the same documents I had brought. Within minutes, he noticed duplicate inspection entries, conflicting timestamps, and a completed inspection that should not have existed before the scheduled appointment. He immediately suspended every active compliance matter involving my property while he opened an internal review. For the first time since this began, I believed the situation might actually be resolved without going any further. Driving home, I checked my homeowner account and watched every previous violation disappear from the portal. My inspection history was temporarily locked pending review. It looked like common sense had finally prevailed. The feeling lasted less than 24 hours. The next morning, a certified envelope arrived from the association's attorney. Instead of confirming the internal review, the letter accused me of interfering with official compliance operations and warned that my security recordings could not be distributed without risking legal consequences under community policies. The focus had shifted away from why an inspector entered my home and toward my decision to document what had happened. Before I could call my attorney, the regional manager telephoned again. His voice sounded completely different. He explained that the board had removed his company from handling my file overnight and transferred authority directly to outside counsel. He was no longer permitted to discuss the investigation. As the call ended, my homeowner portal refreshed once more. For barely a second, the hidden property access archive returned. This time I saw one additional line beneath active legacy key inventory before it disappeared forever. It read, "Last audit, never completed." My attorney stared at the screenshot for several seconds before sliding it beside the old community newsletter announcing that homeowners would control their own locks after the management transition. She tapped both documents with her pen and asked a question I had never considered. If the association celebrated ending shared access, why would an active legacy key inventory still exist? That single question changed our entire strategy. We stopped treating Elaine as the center of the dispute and started focusing on whether the transition itself had ever been completed the way homeowners had been told. My attorney contacted the title company again, not to request new documents, but to verify whether any closing instruction ever required homeowners to acknowledge an existing HOA key program. The answer remained exactly the same. No such disclosure appeared in the closing process. She then compared that response with the preservation letter already sent to the association. If a legacy key inventory truly existed and had never been audited, it should have been preserved along with every other requested record. 2 days later, a woman from the management office called my attorney from her personal telephone during her lunch break. She refused to discuss confidential records, but she did confirm one important fact. Years earlier, when the management company changed, employees had been instructed to collect every remaining community key and complete a final audit. She remembered the project because it had never been finished before new leadership redirected everyone to other priorities. She did not accuse Elaine of anything. She simply said nobody had ever announced that the old keys were gone. That statement matched every clue we had already uncovered. Elaine had never acted like someone secretly breaking into homes. She behaved like someone who believed an outdated system still gave her authority. The conflict suddenly became much larger than one inspector making one bad decision. It became a question of whether homeowners had unknowingly been living beside an unfinished transition for years. Before we could decide our next legal step, my attorney received a response to the preservation letter. The association did not produce the requested key inventory. Instead, its attorney stated that no responsive records could currently be located and suggested the requested material might never have existed in the association's present files. That answer directly conflicted with the homeowner portal, the newsletter, and the employee's recollection. My attorney quietly smiled instead of expressing frustration. She explained that contradictions between formal responses and previously established records often became more important than the records themselves. Late that afternoon, my telephone rang from an unfamiliar county number. The caller introduced himself as Deputy Sheriff Daniel Brooks. His first sentence immediately confirmed that the story had entered an entirely different stage. He explained that the sheriff's office had received information concerning possible unauthorized residential entry connected to a homeowners association matter, and before discussing anyone else's conduct, he wanted me to bring every document, every video, and every timeline I had preserved because the investigation was no longer limited to my complaint alone. Deputy Brooks met my attorney and me in a small conference room at the sheriff's office instead of an interrogation room, and that choice immediately told me he was interested in facts rather than accusations. He asked me to explain the timeline one event at a time without guessing about anyone's motives. We laid every document across the table in chronological order. The closing file confirming exclusive possession. The Homeowners Association newsletter celebrating homeowner control over locks. The violation notices that quietly disappeared after I challenged them. The inspection report completed before my scheduled appointment. The camera recording showing Elaine unlocking my front door with a brass key. My written notes documenting her unexpected statement about leaving everything inside my home exactly the way she had left it. The screenshot showing property access archive and active legacy key inventory followed by last audit. Never completed. Deputy Brooks studied the sequence carefully before speaking. He explained that the investigation would focus on verifiable actions rather than assumptions about intent. If someone sincerely believed they possessed authority, that belief did not automatically create legal authority. That distinction changed the entire atmosphere in the room. Later that afternoon, my attorney received notice that the association had agreed to participate in a formal meeting involving outside counsel, management representatives, and Elaine herself. For the first time, nobody questioned whether Elaine had entered my house. The disagreement had narrowed to one issue alone: whether she possessed lawful authority to do so. Before the meeting, my attorney advised me not to argue, interrupt, or react emotionally regardless of what was said. She explained that every person at the table would already know the facts. The outcome would depend on how those facts fit together under property law, not who appeared more persuasive. Meanwhile, the association continued defending its position. Through its attorney, it maintained that long-standing operational practices had guided inspectors for years and that Elaine acted in good faith while performing community responsibilities. That explanation no longer surprised me. In fact, it confirmed the pattern we had uncovered. Nobody denied the key existed. Nobody denied the inspection occurred before the appointment. Nobody denied the report contained observations from inside my home. The only remaining question was whether tradition could replace actual authority after ownership had legally transferred to me. The evening before the scheduled meeting, Deputy Brooks called with one final update. He told me his office had completed its preliminary review of the documents already provided and had verified that the management transition described in the newsletter had in fact occurred when stated. He did not discuss any conclusions, but he asked me to bring the original video files rather than copies because they might need to be reviewed alongside the association's records. After ending the call, I looked once more at the brass key frozen on my camera screen as Elaine calmly unlocked my front door. By the next morning, she and I would finally be sitting across the same table with every important document between us. And for the first time since this began, neither of us would be able to avoid the single question that mattered most. The conference room was quieter than I expected. Elaine sat across from me with her attorney, the association's outside counsel, and representatives from the management company. Deputy Brooks remained at the far end of the table beside my attorney, saying almost nothing as the meeting began. Instead of making accusations, my attorney placed the documents in the same order we had rehearsed. First came the closing papers confirming exclusive possession of the property. Next came the Homeowners Association newsletter announcing that homeowners would maintain control over their own locks after the management transition. Then came the completed inspection report dated before my scheduled appointment, followed by the camera footage showing Elaine unlocking my front door with the brass key. Nobody challenged the authenticity of any document. The association's attorney shifted the discussion toward history rather than evidence. He explained that inspectors had relied on inherited procedures for many years and argued that Elaine reasonably believed she was acting within long-standing operational practices designed to protect the community. Elaine finally spoke for herself. She remained calm and answered every question directly. She admitted using the brass key, admitted entering my home before the scheduled appointment, and admitted completing the inspection report afterward. However, she insisted she had never believed she was violating anyone's rights because she had been trained that legacy keys remained available whenever an inspection required confirmation beyond what could be seen from outside. Her explanation did not sound rehearsed. It sounded sincere. For a brief moment, I understood how someone could make such a serious mistake without believing they were doing anything wrong. My attorney did not argue with her. Instead, she quietly slid the newsletter across the table and asked one simple question. After this notice was distributed, what written policy authorized inspectors to continue using legacy keys for occupied homes? The room became noticeably quieter. The association's attorney searched through several binders, while management representatives reviewed electronic files. Minutes passed without an answer. Deputy Brooks then requested that the association identify any document replacing the homeowner's exclusive possession established at closing or any written policy preserving inspector access after the management transition. Again, no document appeared. Elaine slowly looked down at the brass key resting beside the inspection file. She no longer defended the legality of entering my house. She only explained that nobody had ever instructed her to surrender the key or stop following the procedure she had inherited. The distinction mattered emotionally, but it did not resolve the legal question now sitting at the center of the room. My attorney then displayed the screenshot showing property access archive, active legacy key inventory, and last audit, never completed. The management representatives quietly acknowledged that the transition audit referenced in the old records had never been formally completed. Deputy Brooks closed the folder in front of him and looked around the table before speaking for the first time in several minutes. He explained that every participant had now confirmed the essential facts, and the remaining question was no longer what had happened inside my home, but what legal authority, if any, had actually existed when Elaine unlocked my front door. As silence settled across the room, everyone understood that the answer to that single question would determine everything that happened next. Deputy Brooks finally answered the question that had driven every conversation since Elaine unlocked my front door. He explained that good faith could explain a person's actions, but it could not create legal authority where none existed. The closing documents transferred exclusive possession of my property to me. The Homeowners Association newsletter confirmed that homeowners controlled access after the management transition. No written policy replaced those rights. No completed audit documented that legacy keys remained authorized. The inspection report proved entry before the scheduled appointment, and the video established exactly how that entry occurred. Together, the evidence showed that Elaine had entered an occupied home without lawful authorization, even though she genuinely believed she was following an outdated practice. The sheriff's office confirmed that its investigation would proceed based on the documented facts rather than assumptions or tradition. The association's attorney requested a short recess. When everyone returned, the tone had changed completely. The board agreed to withdraw every inspection, violation, and compliance action connected to my property that resulted from the unauthorized entry. They also accepted my attorney's demand that the association immediately complete the long overdue legacy key audit referenced in its own records, recover every remaining key still in circulation, certify in writing that no unauthorized keys remained assigned to occupied homes, and adopt a revised inspection policy requiring homeowner consent or another lawful basis before any interior access. Elaine quietly placed the brass key on the conference table. She admitted she should have questioned the old procedure instead of assuming it remained valid after the management transition. She was removed from inspection duties while the association completed its internal review and policy changes. No dramatic argument followed because none was necessary. The documents, the timeline, the inspection report, the camera recording, the vanished violations, the incomplete audit, and Elaine's own statements had already answered every important question. A few weeks later, my attorney delivered the final written confirmation. My homeowner record had been cleared. The inspection completed before my appointment had been permanently removed. The association acknowledged in writing that I had never consented to the interior entry, confirmed that every known legacy key had been accounted for during the completed audit, and reimbursed my reasonable attorney fees together with the cost of replacing every exterior lock on my home. The sheriff's investigation had forced the issue that nobody inside the association had been willing to confront for years. One evening after work, I parked in my driveway, walked to the same front door that had once opened with someone else's brass key, and unlocked it with the new key that only I possessed. This time I did not check my cameras before stepping inside, because I no longer needed reassurance that the house was truly mine. I simply closed the door behind me, knowing the law and the lock finally protected the same boundary. A home belongs to the person who holds the legal right to its door.